We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 1 of the indictment, cause number 2000.
Not guilty on all counts. Just about 2 hours ago, a jury reached a unanimous verdict for 3 former SAPD officers. They were on trial for killing a woman in her own apartment.
The verdict is in. 3 former San Antonio police officers are cleared of all charges in the shooting death of Melissa Bettis.
After 4 weeks of testimony and dozens of witnesses, a Bexar County jury found all 3 not guilty.
Well, the courtroom verdict sending shockwaves through the Justice Center today. 3 former San Antonio police officers accused in the shooting death of Melissa Bettis found not guilty on all charges. The jury left for deliberations just after 1 p.m. today and reached a verdict before 3 o'clock.
2 of the officers faced 4 charges, including murder. The 3rd officer, aggravated assault, an assault in connection to the shooting that the defense claimed was self-defense.
Every incident is blown into some seismic event that creates this narrative that allows people to keep on saying the police are out of control, the police are not this.
Because there's an agenda since Obama to destroy law enforcement.
Hey, brother, everybody that's a police officer doesn't deserve to be a police officer.
Yeah.
It's something you have to continuously earn.
It was to parade them in front of the media, in front of the people, and the chief to say, I'm holding them accountable. They screwed up because I'm this friggin' top dog. I know everything, when he fucking doesn't. And as we know now, who's got one of the biggest slaps in the face is this chief of police, that they were wrong.
Blu Wolf Podcast.
This episode of the Blu Wolf Podcast is the second part in a series covering the event and aftermath of an officer-involved shooting in September of 2023. If you would like to see a breakdown of the shooting, please watch our previous podcast. Thank you for watching.
Welcome to the Blu Wolf Podcast. I'm here with David Sapansky, and the trial involving the 3 San Antonio police officers in the shooting of Melissa Bettis is over. Thank God.
Thank God indeed.
Thank God. These guys, Alfred Flores was charged with murder, aggravated assault twice, and deadly conduct. Eleazar Alejandro was charged with the same thing. Nathaniel Villalobos was charged with aggravated assault and deadly conduct. They are free men today. Thank God justice has prevailed. It was a very long trial. It was a month-long trial. And again, praise God for this.
Not guilty on all counts.
On all counts.
In a very quick turnaround.
And I'll talk about that here in a bit. But the defense attorneys, I said it from the beginning, that they had the A team against the state, the DA. Nico LaHood from the LaHood Norton Law Group, Jason Goss, Jay Norton was there, Ben Cifuentes and Mario Del Prado. They worked together on this case with his law firm. And then you had Tom Nisbet and Chris Newman from the Christian Nisbet Casillas Law Group. These guys worked seamlessly. I was there and behind the scenes on a lot of it. I never saw any disagreements on how they were going to approach certain things. It was really great to watch and awesome to watch these guys work together and just complement each other. Each one had different strengths. They had, I wouldn't even say different weaknesses because none of them had a weakness, right?
Their styles were different but complementary.
100%.
Like wherever one, I mean, Nico's got all of it, right? The whole charisma, all of that good stuff. But I mean, the rest of them, their styles were, different, and each one kind of filled a void. It was really awesome to see.
Yeah. But together, they kicked the shit out of the DA. Yeah. They kicked the shit out of Daryl Harris and David Noonan. And the other, I don't know what the other younger kid was. He was there, not the whole time, but, fuck him too. Sorry, I have to say that. And I say that strongly because this was one of the most obvious wastes of time and obviously money that this DA tried to put forth to imprison these officers for life. And
but let me just say this, man, the prosecutors have a job to do. And if they're doing it, I've never taken it personal. It just seems in this case here, the case should have never went to trial. And there were certain parts of the the investigation that the state knew about, and that for whatever reason they just didn't want to disclose it. And I just feel that's where that last part comes in. You guys know better and should have done better. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it's like, I hate to say, I don't want every prosecutor to say it's personal. I know a lot of prosecutors that did a really good job, and even defense attorneys that have done a really good job, and I've never taken it personal. But this one seemed to breach that line of like, what is your ethical responsibility in this case to let justice prevail? I feel that way.
We have to get into that discussion a little bit more, no doubt. But speaking of a waste of time and waste of money, as you said, a very quick verdict came back on Monday, not this past Monday, not yesterday, but the Monday before, within 15 minutes. And if you were watching, it looked like it was within 45 or so. But at the end of these trials, the attorneys get to speak with the jurors, which is a good idea to do. So you get to find out where you sat, what they thought or whatever. And at certain times, some of these, in fact, the last case that I worked on with Nico, with Thomas and Carlos, they did it in a mistrial. So once it ends in a mistrial, they're able to speak to the jurors and say, hey, what were y'all thinking? And in this situation, they spoke to him. Actually, Nico had lunch with him and Jason, and they deliberated in 15 minutes. If that isn't one of the biggest mandates on a waste of friggin' time, and especially their time, those poor people were, I saw this, they were jerked around, and not maliciously. It wasn't intended to be. It was just a process that happened. Sometimes they would get there, let's say 9:30 in the morning. They would come in to the courtroom, and then they'll start litigating, and then somebody will object, and then they'll say, well, I'd like to speak to this without the presence of the jury. So they'd get back up and they'd go back out and forever.
There was some efficiency issues that came up.
Yeah.
But really on the other side, if you want to be, glass half full, it really was a validator of the justice system. It can be looked at it like that, right? These guys came out. If you came back in 15 minutes, that means that the evidence was so compelling, you didn't even have to leave the room. They could have just polled the jury right there.
Sure. Sure.
And
they wanted that directed verdict a few times, going, of course, from the judge, obviously. But I'm going to give it to Judge Rangel, through his experience, because he's got a lot. Maybe he said, okay, I see it going this way. Let me let it play out this way.
Well, I think he probably, if he's never going to say that, certainly wouldn't say it to us. But I think he probably felt that a directive verdict could have been issued, but he just knew there was a lot of politics involved in this, and there would be a lot of pushback. And so he knew that letting go to the jury was probably the safest way to do it. And it worked out.
You know what I didn't think about? He has a podcast. It's called Behind the Gavel, Ron Rangel. I'm going to see if we can get him on.
Yeah, I'd love to.
About this trial.
I know Judge Rangel, just in passing.
Yeah.
And, testified in his court when I was a commander. I had to go see him about some things. I don't know him well enough to make that call, but if you can get him on here, I'd love to talk to him a little bit. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I mean, especially since we fought so hard, I say we, Nico and the other attorneys, to get it removed out of Boyd's chambers, right? Her courtroom. And that would have
been a complete travesty of justice. And I don't want to turn this in, because when we had Jason Wolf on here, we talked specifically about that judge. And we're not going to do that now, but it was removed from that courtroom for a reason. And it was ultimately put into let's just say a more tenured and obviously completely respected district court judge. So I did want to say one thing, just because I know we're going to get into this very quickly. When we did the first part of this podcast, it was on day 14, I think 15, something like that. And so Soto was still was on the witness stand. And I think
Detective Soto.
Yeah, Detective Soto. And we really wanted to get out here just because it needed to be talked about. It was going to be a long trial, and we had a lot to say, as does everybody, right? But there was a lot of things that came out in the second half of the trial, or after we did the first part, that I didn't know. Willie was involved. Maybe he knew. I'm sure there were things that he didn't know. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff today, because even though we were in law enforcement when you're out, even people that are active on the department don't know all the information that's happening within the homicide unit, because there has to be some confidentiality there. And so, without just the whole little gossip mill working, we had some information, but there was a lot of things that came out. And I think those things are going to be really important to talk about, because, I just think that some of it should have been disclosed, and it wasn't. But we'll get there.
You're talking about the politics related from the department and that?
Well, let's just get there, because it's going to be more along the lines of why. Okay, we're going to get there now, right? Why was Daryl Harris at the original crime scene? Why is that a conflict of interest? I don't think it is, but I think it should have been disclosed.
Right.
He in the first part of the trial made a declaration to the judge that a juror approached him because he had some snazzy tie or something like that. You felt compelling enough to talk to the judge about that, but you never, and maybe you did and we're not aware of it, but you should have disclosed that you were at that scene. Could you still prosecute it? Yeah, absolutely. And so those are the revelations that have come out. And I know that under this particular DA, which I did not know before, Nico was a DA before him, that they send people from, their personal integrity unit?
No, the civil rights
unit to every officer involved shooting. I did not know that. And so why are you sending them out there? If it's civil rights unit, you're going out there just to do what? To see if there is some sort of wrongdoing on this.
That's unprecedented, and through
everything here is unprecedented. So
through our
anyway, I didn't mean to
that's
jump
one of
on
those
it,
things.
Jump in, but my point was when we did the first podcast, we gave you what we knew. Now we know much more, and so hopefully, we'll get a chance to talk about that.
Mind you, that's why we wanted. We're not trying to beat a dead horse. I mean, this is a huge horse, and that we should not just let bygones be, it happened. Congrats to these officers. They're free. And we just move on, because there's so much that came out of this trial, not just
including that they met with Daryl Harris, the homicide commander, met with Daryl Harris. And we talked about that almost a year ago on a podcast. You can beat the rap at the ride. I think something like, hey man, this is what happens. They get together. It's a shitstorm coming. Some AC, probably Bobby Blanton or Karen Falks at the time, says, hey, we can cut these guys loose. They do consult with the DA. This is not the first time. And they make a decision to arrest really quickly and fire them and let them go through the process so they can wash their hands of it and make themselves look good. We talked about this very thing.
There's so many details that we don't know. And on face value, yeah, it looks bad. But the unfairness that we saw in that situation was that from the start of the incident, 16 hours later, these officers that Lawrence had been walked, they were arrested and charged in the same day.
And convicted in public opinion.
Convicted of public opinion, because the narrative started, the political part, through our own administration. Yeah. She was obviously going through a mental episode. Well, you're looking at hindsight. You're already too late on your assessment that you're using an advantage you have now that these guys didn't have at that time. Hindsight is 20/20. But I go even further. Now you wrote arrest warrants, applied for arrest warrants and things like that. You probably do it faster than most. But I'm gonna be generous that they had to have made this decision. I'm gonna give them 6 hours into the situation.
Yes.
Right? Because they did, no doubt, conferred with
the way that usually happens when there's officer involved shooting or something like that. So the shooting team commander will come out. That's the homicide lieutenant or the homicide captain. They'll come out, the deputy chief over that area, the chief of staff. Everybody's there, right? It's like one big marshmallow, or whatever you call it. And so they're there and they're all powwowing. And usually the way that conversation goes, which is a great example of this, what we're talking about, you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the ride, because it hasn't gone, right? It hasn't really gone. It hasn't gone to criminal court, right? And at some point, that'll go through its process. I have my own opinions on should that be a deadly force situation or not, like you do, but
lots of officers.
Yeah, but that's not even really for this. But what it is, that's a perfect example of how they gather up. They realize this is a shitstorm coming, and it's brewing fast, and they're just saying, what can we do to
What shitstorm? What is the shitstorm?
The shitstorm is the political part, the public part of it, the press and the media pushing on it. That made national news, right? It's on Fox, it's on
not anything having to do with the law necessarily. No. We're not even there yet.
It's the pressure and the perception that the police department is not in line with the expectations of whatever the citizens of this particular world. Right? And so the decisions are made very quickly. And so it came like this. So what do you think we should do? Somebody says, hey, you know what? Do we have enough to arrest him? And I'm sure that the homicide commander was probably saying, I think we're too early for that. I'm not throwing him under the bus. I haven't talked to him. Leave him alone, right? Yeah. But any rational commander would say, I think it's too early for that. We don't even really know what's going on. And then you have probably the cheapest.
I'm going to tell you right now, I have no doubt when they made this decision, the shooting, the crime scene was still being processed.
Oh yeah.
Shooting team was still on scene.
Yeah, and so that decision was made. Hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and walk warrants on him. It gives us an opportunity for the chief to get out there and say, hey, we have walked warrants on this. We've consulted with the district attorney.
As you know, the DA is going to go, what? We're going to screw over some police officers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go.
And it makes them look good. It makes everybody look good. But it doesn't make, they don't take into account, the officers, the stress.
It almost seems like
it comes to fruition, right?
It always seems like we're like fortune tellers, like soothsayers, because a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in these podcasts prior, of course, involving different situations, have led up to this. And the undertone has pretty much been exactly this right here. This is and was no doubt a political persecution. You can see all the workings and the process that they took to get this out there. And obviously, and I don't want to try to figure out what to call it right now, besides that, but and as we talk, it'll reveal itself a little bit more. But
there's another part of this, right, that I don't know that we're going to circle back to. The not guilty on counts and acquittal is amazing. That is by far the biggest hurdle these three men had to overcome, getting their liberty taken from them and going to prison. But that fight's not over. They still have to fight for their jobs back. They don't have jobs. They don't have insurance. They don't have any income that I'm aware of. Maybe somebody's going to pick them up. They have attorney's fees. These attorneys probably gave them a hometown deal as much as they could have, but they get paid to do a great job.
And of course, Cleet will help out with some of that.
Cleet will help out with that for sure. And then there's the whole stigma and reputation that comes with being the people that were on trial for the murder of this person. This mentally, I think you got it up there, right? This woman going through a mental ordeal, and that soft narrative is always being pushed. So, please keep these guys in mind, because this was the biggest hurdle, but there's still a lot of hurdles for them to overcome. So please, if you can, support them. And it would be really nice if somebody out there with a lot of money in San Antonio could find a way to anonymously help them with their legal fees. But we don't have a big enough reach to do that. But there's a lot of money in San Antonio. And if somebody happens to see that, these three people are well worth somebody stepping in and making their lives considerably better.
No doubt. But going back to what I was saying about not beating a dead horse, we want to dissect this as much as we can and bring out everything that came from this trial, this from the very beginning, no doubt. And so this is the first of what we want to do as a series with this podcast, because if we had everybody that we wanted to bring on at one time, it would be a long freaking podcast. And in the interest of time, obviously, we're going to break it up. We want to bring on the attorneys, depending on who agrees, which at this point we have two of the three law firms representatives from there, Nico Vincifuentes. I haven't heard back from Tom Nisbet, but I'm sure he will get back with me. I'm sure he probably would want to come on. The experts, Lisa Miller. I haven't reached out to Mark Duke. We'll see what he says. Of course, myself, I was one of the experts, which will be part of that. And one that was not going to be an expert necessarily, but he was a witness, and now he's retired, Sergeant Ed Pedraza. He's agreed to come on. Now, he should have some really good information that we need to get out there, because he was involved in that meeting that these people had, the DA, Darrell Harris, the upper administration, Chief McManus, all the chiefs, from what I hear.
They're not all the chiefs that are there. I just hear that when they say, well, the entire command staff. That's not how that works. It's like the chief, the two assistant chiefs, and the two XOs, because they're not going to bring the other DCs in this thing. They're going to keep it close to the best, and it's just McManus at the time, Bobby Blatton, Jason Einquist, Karen Falks, and whoever was sitting in that other seat. It might have been Jesse Solomon at the time. Those are the people that meet, and they're the ones that get in McManus's ear, and they're the ones that make the decision. Now, it's a different cast of characters now, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what happened.
Detective Ron Soto was in there, no doubt. Captain Russ Van Geffen was in there.
Training Academy
Commander Vada, Robert Vada, I believe is his name. And of course, Ed Pedraza. And speaking to him without getting too much, we'll be able to obviously talk to him when he comes on the podcast. But he said when he got there that the room was dark already. They were going to show the videos, and I say the videos, which obviously, even the lead detective didn't see all of them before he made this decision. So they saw whatever they saw, and the pretty much it wasn't they took a consensus. They just pretty much said, we all agree that this is not a good shoot, right? And of course, the underlings are going to go, yeah, sure, whatever. And they made that decision to walk the warrants on these 3 officers and then have them arrested within 16 hours. But
it was actually, now that we found out, right, through what we didn't know, like 6 hours, right? I think we said 6
that they decided to do that. Yeah. And I knew that, because you have to write them, you have to make the decision, you have to do whatever. And we'll talk about, what we saw with the warrants and what came out in the trial with that. But stay tuned.
I hope Ed Pedraza comes on, because I think he can shed a lot of light on what else we've talked about when on the last podcast with the Thomas Villarreal and Jesse Allen podcast and Carlos Castro, of course.
And I don't want to say too much about what his and my conversation was just yet, because it'd be better hearing it from him on some of the details.
Talk about what he said, but he was over tactics, and we pointed out, rightfully so, because it came from the arbitrator, right? I read it straight from the arbitrator. There were 3 use of force experts from the academy that came to the arbitration hearing for Thomas Villarreal and said, hey, this was not what you're saying it is.
Right.
It was justifiable. And if he was their sergeant, then he would have been over them, and he hopefully would be able to comment on that, because I think those are the things
we can go back and talk about that. 100%.
To talk about it, to see if this is a viable,
I think it's worth it,
pattern of kind of what Ben said that time, right?
Yeah,
malicious.
Yeah. Well, what do you call it? Malicious prosecution is what he called it. And speaking of Ben, when Ben, I was there when Ben gave his interview to the news. And they were asking him, was there anything, I don't know the exact question, but they were related to any kind of civil or criminal type of, I wouldn't say retaliation, but can't think of the word, but like anything that comes after this. And Ben,
I think he said malicious prosecution.
Yeah, very seriously was like, yeah, man, I think he's getting tired of this, as we all are, and I'm sure the majority of our listeners are. We're getting tired of this shit by this Soros-bought DA. And then this trial brought out even more so the involvement of our own chief of police and the administration of the police department. This wasn't just a suggestion. This wasn't a, hey man, this happened, take a look at it. And then the DA ran with it.
Does the chief of the San Antonio Police Department make suggestions? Have you ever known him to make a suggestion? No, he just tells you what to do. That's it.
Pretty much.
Never open to suggestions.
Right. No. I mean, he makes up his mind, and this situation, without me hearing it or whatever, it's more of an educated assumption. And we've been pretty right on our educated assumptions so far, and especially with this. This chief saw it at face value. That awful but lawful didn't matter to him. It did look awful to him. The chief worries about his friggin' image, and he pulled a knee-jerk reaction. All of a sudden, let's do this. Let's all agree. Let's get everybody in agreement that this is a bad shoot. To further that, because it's going to be shown in the media that we agree it's a bad shoot. Let's get them, warrants walk, arrested to show these people, and then suspended without pay that.
But you skipped an important step that Chief McManus does in these circumstances. Maria, right? Deputy City Manager.
Oh, yeah.
Maria Gomez. This is what we got. Yeah, she was having a mental crisis. She did what? Okay. Yes, I expect you to handle that. Okay. Keep me posted. That's his first phone call. I said it the last time. I'll say it this time. And it's no one else is to her.
At this point, she is not going to go, no, I don't think you should do that. Yeah. She is going to jump up and down.
Which means what? The city hall is now involved in this, right? So now when they say there was, like when McManus did some sound right after this thing, well, I don't think he did sound. I think he gave a statement, because there was a bunch of, there was always a little bit of a rollout that always happens. It says, hey, we want a no confidence vote and people have questions. There were some other capital murder cases at the DA's office that were handled poorly. And I think everybody's getting like a dose of it. But I think he put out, there was no politics involved in this decision. Really? You know, you call, and I've said this on the last podcast, I've had people under my command who are involved in officer-involved shootings. I've been right next to the chief of police. He's on the phone with Marias. You know, so that means it's political, right? That's what that means.
Yeah, no. I mean, I like I said, I don't think he even has to call her, because that's a champion situation for, again, this leftist city government. Someone, and I don't want to say exactly who, but they had a problem with me calling them leftists and liberals, and probably because he was one, or is one, or considers himself one, and you know, understood, you know, and respect to that person. But it's gotten to a point where that is what it is. The chief wiped his hands of these guys, and I said this in the last podcast, just to prove to all the anti-police people that he's doing something. He's holding officers accountable, because that's the big, you know, that's what they all scream: accountability. Show these officers, hold them accountable to their actions. Well, you know, who is held more accountable than a person that goes to their job every day, basically patrol officers and detectives that are working in the field with a friggin' body camera on, and you get in trouble if you don't wear it or turn it on, or if you mute it when, you know, they don't think you should have or whatever. That's accountability as hell. You know what I mean? And so he did that. So these leftists, these crybabies in the media, and then you have your Act 4SA assholes that are going to bitch and moan. And I said this in the last podcast, and we'll show this here, right now, where Jalen McKee Rodriguez made a quote saying before the last contract that the officers would have been on a paid vacation, meaning they would have been on admin duty, still getting paid while the investigation goes on, which is something we've always enjoyed. That's part of our contract. And so these people they don't like the police. They're going to do everything that they possibly can to destroy the culture, for one. And I don't know what they want instead of that, because it's going to come to a point, you know, we do protect those people too, you know, and they enjoy the safety that we provide, but there's this huge push to just destroy the police culture. Now, this win here with these three officers, they won their freedom. Okay, so they don't have to worry about becoming a felon. They don't have to worry about going to prison for life. It's a win for them. And I spoke to one of them yesterday. Dude sounds like, I said, wow, you sound like you're walking on a cloud. And he's like, man, I feel so great. Like a weight's been lifted off my shoulder, as it should be. But the damage has been done, not just to them. And then there's a couple of them that are going to fight for their jobs back. You're not going to get the same officer. They're going to come back very, you know, pardon the pun, gun shy, so to speak, and just jaded.
And then there's that residual effect of the troops are in the field, the officers in the field that maybe won't engage to the same level they would have, because, hey, you know, and it's so kind of ironic that people, you know, there's been people that have voiced in their own way that are on the police department that they think this was a right to shoot. And then in the first podcast, I made the comment, like, you know, I understand there's a lot of emotions, but policy is policy and legality is legality. But policy always plays into it. But I mean, the jury is to consider just were they justified in using deadly force under Chapter 9. But you're going to have to talk about policy. But the people that are saying, hey, that wasn't a right to shoot, or they're questioning the officers, you almost want to ask him, hey, and it's just a movie reference, and I'll make it really quick and we'll get here. But, you know, in the title, it just happens to be the title. We're not talking about this, but it was called A Time to Kill. And it was with Matthew McConaughey, and it's in the South, and he's doing this thing, and this young black girl was brutally abducted and sexually assaulted, and they threw a beer can in, and they hurt her, and they tried to hang her, and she almost died, and she did it. And McConaughey's making this argument, and he tells the jury to close their eyes. And he goes through them step by step by step by step, and then he says, now imagine that she's white. Now, should it changed everything. Should it? No. So the officers that are out there saying that should have never happened, close your eyes and think about you going to a call that is a know-nothing call in your mind, and it's been so hard and so fast that you wind up in a shooting that this might be you. And
Easily.
that, you know,
Easily.
and that's the part I don't understand. It's like you have to kind of understand that. I think Mike Kelly said it when we had him on the podcast. They don't understand because it only happens to about 1% of the people. But if you're the 1%, it means everything to you.
Sure.
And so I think that's important to say. I mean, this could happen to any of you. So back to the original point, you know, that residual effect is going to have to be dealt with. And I don't know how you deal with that as long as you have the same people at the helm that, at least for the most part, are continuously showing that they're absolutely, without question, morally bankrupt in the decisions that they're making. And there's no other way to put it.
No, that you said that's very well put, very good point to make. And those of you watching at the trial, I met some young officers. You know, the department's changed so much in my 3 years being gone. I don't recognize some of these people, but they were there to support these officers on verdict day, and you know, breaks and whatever. Introduce myself to these guys, and it was really nice to hear these younger guys. Yeah, I listen to your podcast. Oh, you do? Okay. You know, and these are newer people, which is awesome. And so we're speaking to you. Do not think this cannot be you. If these guys thought that everything they were doing in this call for service, mind you, it wasn't a proactive, you know, objective that they had. It was a call for service that went the way it did. And if you follow the trial, you see how things kind of, like this situation, it started out as a call. Okay, she got away. We're just going to leave her. They were about to walk away. Here comes Kenji Uno, the maintenance man. He determines that it's a felony amount of criminal mischief. Oh, that changes things. Now she's a felon. So then it started waning off, and then it came back up, you know, and then more officers show up, and then they're trying to do certain things, and then she throws the candle, you know, and injures an officer. Of course, the E-tone goes out, and that's when it starts getting other people out there. So unless you're this slug of an officer, and I've known a few, that just says, you know what, man, I'm gone. Let me check 10-8. Let me go to the coffee shop, you know, and of course that's old school stuff, but let me just go back to sitting in my favorite spot and not doing a damn thing. This could be you. And I think us as officers have this mental safety thing that says, no, I wouldn't do something that's stupid.
There's something else that came out in the trial after we did the first podcast, is that a lot of the individuals that came later in response to the emergency tone never really were given the information or a total briefing about what the other ones had. So there were communication breakdowns.
100%.
Sure. And a lot of people have to understand that's that, because they keep going. Like, you know, everyone keeps going, you know, like, why didn't you taser? Why didn't you taser? Why didn't you taser? You know, why didn't you do this? So, yeah, there's a lot of questions out there, but, you know, that lack of communication at the scene, the decisions that were made, you know, going back to policy, I'll just say, you know, and I think if we're going to have a legitimate podcast, then we should talk about things, you know, about what really, you know, and then I'll challenge the chief of police to something right here, right now. And I would love for someone that's going to, like Yami, I don't think Yami gets much access to him anymore, but Dylan Collier, you know, so the policy violations that were continuously discussed for body worn cameras, what were the retention times, things like that. Critical incidents is obviously going to be in there, mentally ill persons, crime scene duties, and all of the rules and regs, right? All of the rules and regs were in there. But, you know, one of the things that my challenge is, I was telling Nick, we're going to put this up there, but I don't have it right now, but you're going to see it. When you deal with the rules and regs, it is from 200, it was a 100 to 200, it goes all the way to 900. So it's just volumes and volumes and volumes. Every situation has a procedure, and all of those have sub parts of the procedure. And so you're looking at all this stuff.
200. You're talking about the sections in the
yeah, and what these officers are responsible for.
Correct.
So
and the general manual.
If they can't quote the policy, right? And so, you know, you look at it, then they have to understand not just the general manual, but the SOPs, the penal code, the traffic code, the CCP, city ordinance, not to mention the tactics that they have to learn, the driving at code, and all of these different things. It's just a flood of information that you have to be responsible for. And yes, sometimes we can reference it, But when you're on the witness stand and people are talking about policies, and then, you can't quote them, which I thought Salinas did a really good job because he knew the policies. He just couldn't give them verbatim.
Yeah.
But my
he was close enough.
My challenge to the chief of police is if anybody were to walk up to him and ask him specifically about the general manual policies that were here and ask him to give you a version of it, he couldn't do it. I'm giving him the questions to the test, and he couldn't answer those questions because one, he doesn't read them. And two, he's just disinterested in knowing them, but he'll hold everyone else accountable to him.
Yeah.
And so on here, if you look at the tasers, which they call it, electronic control devices, there's a section in there where it says should not use taser, we'll call it a taser, when deadly force is clearly justified. Like it literally says it in the policy. And of course it has another part, unless there's deadly, unless there's somebody there that can provide lethal cover. But I mean, those things are important when you look at the volume of information these people know. But this question came down to one thing. In the Texas Penal Code, were they justified in using deadly force under Chapter 9? And every one of those people on the jury said, yes, they were.
Yeah. I mean, and when it comes down to it, that's why these situations, when it goes to trial, everything involved in that case, all the paperwork, all the reports, all the data, the crime scene sketches, the ballistics of the bullets and the shell casings, the primer markings, the GSRs, gunshot residue tests, that they get from the officers, the photos of the officers right after the scene, of course, all the body worn cameras. And what we saw, which was a big deal, was the auto trails that Ben Cifuentes brought out that proved a lot of stuff.
Well, that's the part where policy cuts both ways.
Yeah.
They'll point the policy finger at you, but when you point it back at them,
it was used against them.
Yeah, exactly. It was used against them. And, the same thing applies to them. There's just volumes and volumes of policy. But if you're going to get up there and act self-righteous, you better be self-righteous.
Sure. But what I'm saying is that here's all the information. They bring it all in, one big tub. And in the trial, they throw it all out. You know what I mean? One thing about that, though, what we saw with this DA, they cherry-picked what evidence to put forth. And if you watch, it started with the opening statement where Darrell Harris is describing that when Melissa Bettis evaded arrest, that's what she did. She evaded arrest on foot from Rojas. He just said, well, she just decided to go back to her apartment. And no, why wouldn't you describe it as her evading arrest? That is a crime. Regardless of her mental state, that is a crime. The woman was upright. She wasn't in a wheelchair. She was ambulatory. She was moving around. She was strong. The only problem with her that was going on was right here.
But even that, Willie, seriously, the whole time she was talking, she was lucid. She was communicating.
Sure.
It wasn't coming out. You need a warrant. You don't have rights to come in here. I know the law. So, those are the two things, those sound bites that you and I have talked about, that they use all the time. And it's like an anchor to law enforcement. The first one is de-escalation. And the second one is mental crisis. And they attach those words in this trial, and they do it so much, and it's like a weight on you. But not every person that's suffering a mental episode gets a mulligan. You don't get a wash. In this case, she wasn't psychotic. She wasn't having a psychotic breakdown. She was lucid. And they play those cards all the time whenever they feel like it.
Yeah, that's a good point. How many times did we text during the trial, back and forth, where like this fucking de-escalation, this thing brought up, used when that's not the answer. That is why I'm so passionately against that word, in a sense, and the way it's being used in law enforcement, because it is not the answer. It did start out as an answer. They tried to use it, and this was during the Obama years. I did some research on it, is when all this started. Now, granted, they went back to talking about, and Sir Robert Peel, back when, the English Bobbies, he mentioned something, not that word exactly, but mentioned something about trying to diffuse the situation. Understandably, when you hire and you have good people, they're going to try to calm things down already, because that's the way the type of people they are. But it's become a tactic, and it has become that. And really, the reason it did was because they were trying to find a way on how not to shoot black people that were involved in crime and criminality. Michael Brown in Ferguson, Eric Garner in New York. Both of these guys resisted arrest. And here we are inventing something that changes the whole culture of law enforcement to say, hey, this is the answer. Back off.
It's a powerful card that lawyers have learned how to play. I mean, it's those two things. Those are the right now, those are the ankle weights to law enforcement. It's those two things. Everybody will play it every time they can. And the amount of people that are now in that classification of suffering some sort of mental illness or mental episode is risen considerably. Everywhere you go, somebody's having it. People talk about it. Athletes have come out and talked about the weight of things that are on them, and it's become more of an accepted thing. But I'll go back and say this: it doesn't give you a wash. You're still responsible. You can't just attack police officers. You can't do things. You can't spit in their faces. You can't hit them. You can't, do all the different things. You dang sure can't try to kill them. And so, the responsibility has to be levied in a certain way to where no one, people will understand that just because you're in mental crisis doesn't mean you get a complete walk. There's no mulligans here. We'll do the best we can to get you home safe or to a treatment facility. But if you act bad, there's going to be consequences.
Well, mentally ill people can kill you. It happens all the time.
And she was trying to kill them.
Yeah. Well, and, we talk about, and people have heard this, Monday morning quarterbacking. And that's exactly what went on with this DA. And again, I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I mean, you're going to obviously have to judge their actions and things like that. But there was a lot of they should have, they very well could have. And basically they were trying to give her a mulligan because she did have mental health issues. So they would have been fine with, if I doubt the department would have let them, but to camp out there for a week until she passed out or, for however long it took, or decided to give herself up because of what ended up ultimately. I get that. But one thing and before I forget about that, when they talk about time, I was on call outs many times where they're negotiating with somebody and it's late at night and negotiators think that they're making some sort of progress. And we're like, depending on the location of the city, I've told the lieutenant, do you realize that it's about to be 5 o'clock? People are going to start waking up and going to work. And here we are interrupting their lives. We need to get out of here. We need to end this soon. Yeah. And that has to be taken into consideration. That's an apartment complex. All these people are, for one, they're not even being able to sleep that night, if any of them are sleeping. But you have to get these things because we're responsible for not just the safety and of this suspect, but the rest of the people around there. And that's what people forget.
If this would have been a SWAT call out, what's the first thing y'all would have did? Everybody around them, we need you to move, right?
Yeah.
We need to get you to safety. So, those are all things to consider. I know when the handling detective was testifying, I made a reference and I said this was the first time he was the lead on an officer-involved shooting. And I made the reference that he had originally worked at night CID. I skipped over a part that I went back and looked that he had already worked 20 homicides. In homicide. And another important thing that Butch Majeka, one of the experts we'll get to later, and so did Lisa Miller, and I want to say even Mark Duke.
So let me say this about Butch. I want to have Butch on, but Butch is still active somewhere else. So
I don't think we're going to get
I wouldn't want to do that to him.
But I do believe, and I'll say this now, it's going to save it. I believe that the lawyers did an amazing job, and lawyers can do but so much. I think the 4 experts or 5 experts that came on for the defense literally saved these men's lives. I 100% believe that. Not that I'm downplaying what the lawyers did. The lawyers were amazing and letting everyone see the state's ineptness. But the experts coming up, talking about their experience, talking about breaking it down, letting people understand what should be looked at, what should be questioned, how to see those things, and how to interpret it. I literally think that Butch Majeka, Mark Duke, Lisa Miller, Martinelli. I know Ray Bob, who we had on one of our podcasts, was there in an advisory thing. I think Kim Andretti, Bauer, right?
Yeah.
Was there. I mean, there was a lot of people there that felt that they needed
Bobby Moreno.
Bobby Moreno was there for, obviously, and you were there.
Yeah.
But I do think that the experts that testified saved these men's lives, and we all owe you an eternal debt of gratitude for that, 100%.
But what was even better with that is that we were also homegrown. We worked in the same police department. The only expert that, and we'll get to more of that the state brought forward, is some dude from somewhere else, Chuck Joyner, some guy who had a resume that looked like it, was worth the shit, and they try to bring him on, and we'll talk more about him. But I think what went a longer ways with these experts is, hey, Lisa created the training, in homicide. Right.
The homegrown part that you said it hits particularly home, right? I guess 2 homes in one sentence. For me is because while David Lunan talked about these guys being paid handsomely, people should be paid for the skills they bring. But Mark Duke said, Lisa Miller told him, he said it on the stand. I guess Lisa said, I thought you'd never testified for the defense.
Yeah.
And then I think he's friends with Jason Goss. Jason Goss says, hey, can you take a look at this? And I think he said something about the injustices that were here just made me come
After
here.
he saw what he saw, he felt compelled.
Butch Lajeka, right? Probably one of the most tenured homicide guys around, right? I mean, we talked about Jimmy Holguin in the previous content, like really Mount Rushmore, right? And so, we're talking about Butch in almost in that same light, investigated 600 homicides, I think. Didn't get paid anything. He just felt he needed to come testify. So that's the homegrown part of it, because there's still a sense of duty, and that duty is doing the right thing. And I think every one of them had a huge part in saving these men's lives. And I think it came from their duty to want to go up there and say, this was handled poorly, and this shouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I mean, and I was on another case, and it involved a car thief and or car burglars, so to speak. And another expert was working on it with an attorney here. And that other expert goes, well, Willie was shot by a car thief. And he's like, oh, he was. I didn't know that. So they wanted to bring me on. They did hire me, but the case the next day ended in mistrial. Anyway, but what better to have than someone from the same department, having experienced the same thing, to come testify, obviously as an expert on that situation.
It's weighted differently.
It is, because this guy, Joyner, I mean, he, and again, we'll talk more about him in a little bit, but I totally agree with you that these experts really saved these guys. And obviously the questioning and the strategic part of bringing them on when they brought them on. Speaking of these experts, Lisa Miller, retired sergeant, went over the warrants to begin with that were written by Detective Soto on these 3 officers. And I had a lot of the information. It depended on which attorney you got them from. I was working for all 3 attorneys, but I got them through Dropbox from Tom Nisbet. And so obviously those pertain to Alfred Flores. But Ben had he said, go buy a 2 terabyte, external hard drive, because I got a lot of stuff. And sure enough, he had a lot of shit that I did not even have seen, on top of, I think I talked to Bobby, did you see this? He was like, I hadn't seen that. Yes. So Ben is friggin' wizard, man. I mean, he's like the Matrix.
He's meticulous, almost to crazy meticulous.
I think he's got a port in the back of his head. They plug in, and then the computer uploads all the information because he remembers
was the first expert that came on, and I took some of her testimony. But before I get to it, I wanted to say, because we kind of got a little sidetracked, that when those experts got on there, they said that when they were all working in homicide, there were 7 individuals, most experienced ones, that were on the officer-involved shooting team. Now, they said, every detective in homicide is on the officer-involved shooting. You should really revisit that. I said in the first one, there was a lot of inexperience here. Even though Soto had 20 homicides, his experience oozed. He had predetermined decisions. He had all the things Lisa talked about. Emotion, that his emotion came into it. He had a bias, and he jumped to a conclusion. He said from the very first point he got there, I said in the first podcast, unsolicited, right? Served no purpose, just a free will statement. As soon as I got there, I had concerns, but I didn't have predetermined. I didn't have predetermined conclusions. Well, you shouldn't have concerns. Why would you have concerns? And then at one point, I was saying that we kind of got cut off. You had concerns because there were conversations before he got there.
Yeah,
and that's what caused those concerns. But I want to talk about Lisa. I want to say just a couple of quick excerpts, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So when she got on there, they said to her, Soto swore to a magistrate that the affidavit arrest is true and correct to the best of his knowledge. And then Lisa says, details matter in any investigation. And then it came back to her. It says, it seemed, this is what Lisa's saying now, okay? a tenured homicide investigator. I think she was there 7 years before she made sergeant. It seems to me that he, being Soto, was purposely deceptive, not quite lying.
Would you agree that this printer is an obstruction between you and I? I don't
It's
want to move it.
a partial obstruction.
Well, but if somebody characterized it as an obstruction, like Detective Platt, I mean, would this be an obstruction that could stop me?
No.
Me from going at you?
No.
But under somebody's mindset, could this be described in an affidavit as an obstruction?
Yes.
So is that why you were telling the government and us that details matter and thoroughness matters?
The mischaracterizations are, it's almost like purposeful deception, not quite lying, but definitely mischaracterizing things.
The reason I say that is because you're going to see all of these experts use words like that, right? And so purposely deceptive is strong, but she says not quite lying. And then somebody asked her, Lisa says, Soto's investigation was corrupted by a bias in making a decision too early in the investigation without examining all of the evidence before a conclusion was reached.
That was the meeting.
And then it says command influence.
Looking at the totality of the circumstances of this case and the paperwork that was generated by Detective Soto, I believe this investigation was corrupted by the insertion of a bias, making a decision too early in the investigation without examining all of the evidence before a conclusion was reached.
So command influence, right? They ask her about command influence, and she says, yes, there were signs of command influence. And we've been saying all along, there weren't signs of it. There was command influence. Like, you're going to do this shit. That's the end of it. And if Pedraza comes on, he was the subject of command influence.
It was like the open sign, open.
Because when
command
what
influence,
she said at that
influence.
meeting, and I'd love to, talk to him about it more on this podcast or elsewhere. But he went in there and says, "Look, I dissent. That's not what happened. I think that's a justified use of force." Not only did they tell him to leave the room, they told him to keep his mouth shut or he would be transferred.
Right.
Or if you want to keep your job at the academy, you need to stop talking.
Yeah.
And then I think word got back to you that his captain basically said something to him too, right?
Yeah. When he picked him up.
Yeah, something.
Before they even got there, he told him that. And again, it'd be better off to hear from Ed, from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But when you're talking about what she said about looking at the affidavit for the warrants, I read those warrants. And I've always said this, I was a patrolman for 25 years. And when I became a detective, I always said I'll never be as good a detective as I was a patrolman, because I just don't have the time, to for another 25 years to be a detective and to be just as good. But I did write, I have written arrest warrants and search warrants and prosecution guides and things like that. I did try to pride myself on doing a good job, as every officer should be, and every detective. And when I read those warrants, and especially, mind you, for something that is so freaking important, I'm not saying there should be any difference between a warrant for a police officer and a warrant for a suspect. They should be equally just as thorough. But you would also expect that you're about to arrest 3 police officers, that they'd be pretty damn good. And she's right. He deceptively left out certain details.
Well, they talked about the 4 corners of a warrant.
Right.
And Nico brought it up. And all that means is that the judge can only look at what's on the warrant. It's
Sure.
the 4 corners of a piece of paper, right?
Yeah.
And so she also said Soto had an obligation to the magistrate that signed the arrest warrants to be truthful in his affidavit so they can determine all of the facts.
So when you're getting your affidavit for your arrest warrant, you don't have to spell out the entirety of your case to the judge, but you have to give them enough information that they can make a decision whether or not they agree that you have probable cause or you do not. But you have a responsibility to the judge to be truthful and tell enough of the story that he gets the realistic picture of what you're asking of him, what the situation was. If there's something that's material or like extremely important in your case, the judge or the magistrate needs to be aware of that. And if you purposefully or even subconsciously leave out critical information like that, you're doing a very grave disservice to the magistrate or the judge, because they are now signing a warrant that they believe is true in its totality. It's like, is not telling the truth the same thing as telling a lie?
So does that sound like deceptively purpose?
Well, he said it.
Deceptive.
He said it. If you listen to his, for those of y'all that haven't, go watch his testimony. They tore him up, and it wasn't hard for these guys, even though they're good, defense attorneys. But it wasn't necessarily hard for them to tear him up and catch him in all kinds of. There were even some, misstatements and possible lies. On this guy, but he kept saying that I only got the probable cause. That's all I needed. I needed the probable cause, which meant that he already had his mind made up, either on his own and or from the influence of the command staff, to go and look at these whatever videos he did, which weren't all of them, and cherry pick what he wanted so he can put it in the warrant. And mind you, the judge doesn't know anything. He sees those details. My issue is that when you have this type of bias, and again, you should watch all of the videos, and there was no time because they didn't want to give him the time to look at everything. Within 16 hours, he wouldn't have been able to. He would have to been up all night, to watch everything, and even then he wouldn't have been able to see, through fatigue.
Some of that has to be put into context a little bit, because we can't assume everybody's been in law enforcement, and even some that haven't been in these roles. So yes, probable cause is what's needed to tear an arrest warrant, right? An affidavit for arrest. But you have to take other things into consideration to even understand why you would need an arrest warrant. Like if there were exculpatory things or things that you didn't know, you wouldn't want to rush to an arrest warrant.
No, right? We didn't even know what the hell exculpatory meant.
So she, the question, so Lisa, again, she said, withholding critical information is a material omission. That's the second time she said something like that. The other one was not quite lying. And so at some point, Butch just says, yeah, that was absolutely untruthful.
In Detective Soto's affidavit, he makes the statement that the officers could not have reasonably believed that Melissa Pettis posed a clear danger to the officers. Do you have an issue with that?
I certainly do.
And what is that?
Detective Soto clearly did not analyze the justification uses of force in here. Not only did he add information into the warrant that was misleading to the magistrate, who may have decided after reading everything that should have been put into the warrant that I'm not going to sign a warrant for murder when there was clearly justification in this case. But his miswording, and it's intentional. That's my opinion, that by putting statements in there that was only favorable to the decision that had been reached earlier was a disservice to these officers, because it did not allow the magistrate to review all the facts to determine probable cause or even the elements of the offense of the case.
All right. Now, getting back to the court decision that you reviewed that's similar to this case, did the magistrate judge in that case say that you cannot analyze the facts of a case from the comfort of the judge's chamber, but you must consider the tense dynamic circumstances facing a reasonable officer?
He did.
And what does that mean to you?
That means exactly what Detective Soto did in this particular case, and what the administration and everybody else did in this particular case. They sat back, they looked at what happened in this case, they looked at the flawed information that they were given that didn't provide justification for this case, and they basically said, because of what the officers did, I don't like it. I don't like the fact that they did this. I don't like the way that it looks. I don't like that this appears to be improper. And they made a decision based on personal opinion. Detective Soto basically said the same thing by giving his opinion in his testimony. I don't like what happened. We can't put people in jail because we don't like what they do. We have to put people in jail because they violate the law and there's no justification for what they did. And that was not the case here. This case was an opinion. The decision was opinionated to the point where it wasn't justified.
Right. And then, so is an intentional omission of this type of circumstance considered lying? Yeah. I mean, I think in this case it is, because after the trial, Nico Lewis giving a statement or an interview to some media station, he says, he says Daryl Harris shouldn't be working in that office. And second, he says, and as far as the lead detective goes, I think they should be looking at aggravated perjury.
Sure.
Right?
That won't happen.
No, it won't happen because they're the ones who did it, right? I mean, that's the problem. But if you just look at it, the definition of aggravated perjury is a person commits an offense if he commits perjury as defined under 3702 of the Penal Code, and the false statement is made during or in connection with an official proceeding, which a trial is, and the second part is material. Yeah. So, those are strong words. And then I think she says something, he tailored his prosecution guide almost to match the narrative. So it's like you're consciously taking this course. And the one thing that I have the biggest problem with Soto is a lot of people were giving him the benefit of the doubt, including me a little bit in the first, because I said, hey, where was the senior people? Where was the sergeant and the lieutenant? And I'll go back now. I hope somebody else caught this. The sergeant and lieutenant were never mentioned in this whole trial. That did not happen.
No.
That means that one of or both of them dissented, right? Or maybe the lieutenant was on a 2-week vacation to Europe and she has nothing to offer, right? Okay, fine, maybe. But usually the sergeant and lieutenant are always in those meetings. But the one thing I have a problem with Soto about is he said, hey, I'm the only one I made this decision. First, he says, I made it with the captain. We came up to it together. These were after the meetings. And then on the stand, he says, you're the one that made the decision. Yeah, I made that decision.
No way.
And then at some point, Butch Majeka says, yeah, that was absolutely untruthful. And so if it's untruthful, are you now Brady'd? Do you want to explain what Brady'd is?
He should have been.
Do you want to explain? Because most people don't know.
I think you can probably do it better than I can.
So Brady list just means you have credibility issues. It's made by the district attorney's office, and they won't use you anymore in a criminal case, because anytime you do, they got to disclose that you weren't credible in cases. You lied, right? We can't take your word for what it is. But even if the DA doesn't put him on the Brady list, which the DA obviously didn't, they brought him. They knew what was going on. Every defense attorney that comes into a trial with Soto on there can raise personal objections to the sitting judge.
And recall the ones that he's investigated before.
Yeah, well, no,
right?
Well, I mean, we talked about that in the first thing. Can this have those facts, those kind of implications? Do we have to go back now and start questioning his integrity on those cases? Will you send it to an appellate court? Can people file appeals now based on credibility? But even if he's not on the Brady list, every time he's in a trial, I guarantee you the defense attorney is going to go to the sitting judge and says, I have questions about his credibility. I can give you the exact date, the exact circumstance.
Yeah.
So is he now effective in homicide? Because that they had a meeting, right? The chief was going to come to homicide. Chief does what he always does, absconded, sends a couple of an assistant chief and a deputy chief down there to talk to him. And as far as what I heard, and I think what you heard, is this is the way they covered it. Well, this guy just went up against some of San Antonio's best defense attorneys, and they'll learn from it. But there were no standards invoked. Like, hey, this is unacceptable. We need better work. We need complete.
I mean,
work.
he might as well have said, slapped him on the shoulder. Hey, good try.
Yeah.
But you went up against some of the best, which you did. But now what? And good try. I mean, I think people miss, because there's been so much out there, so much, just interference, let's say, out there with, focusing on these officers and the political part of it and all that. We are still, as an agency, bound to be ethical and justified and lawful and impartial and unbiased. And how does our own command staff just kind of, hey, good job, even though you did all these things that were presented in court. I mean, it would have been better off with they just kind of just didn't even visit, right? Just kind of let it take its course, however and
well, the reason they do that is because they're part of the problem. right? What did it say? This is what else Lisa said at some point. I don't want to mess it up. She says, there were also problems. Wait a minute. She goes, something about, she stated, the statements taken by night CID were poorly done too. And then Ben asks you, now, and she, can you explain why? She says, now you have multiple units or details involved in a systematic institutional failure. My board is like, wow. So you had homicide, night CID, crime scene, and the chief's office. Involved in the same thing Ben said. Remember, he said in the interview, he says, hey, I would like to see somebody seriously look at why we had this institutional failure. And so those are big words.
Yeah, it wasn't one unit.
Yeah. No, I just named them. It was homicide, night CID, crime scene, and the chief's office, right? And all points in between.
Which is one of those, and I've said this before, the shit will roll uphill sometimes. Yeah, shit rolled uphill on this one.
I just wrote one time on Facebook because, I don't know, I guess I'm just doing shit like that now. But I said, hey man, does SAPD have any more standards? Do they still have standards? They have professional investigative standards. And the answer is no, they don't. Or the chief would have said, hey, this is unacceptable. We're not doing this. We're going to have better training. We're going to hold you more accountable. We're going to make sure you have a complete investigative package. We're going to make sure that our investigators are held to high standards and that they perform at those high standards. You're not doing this. And my point real quick, I'm sorry, Willie, about Soto, what bothered me the most is he contended this was his decision and he had the best out anyone can get. You are under oath, sir. You should have just told the truth.
Yeah.
And you didn't take it.
Yeah.
You should have said, hey, look, I'm under oath. I'm going to say, man, I was told to do this. I was advised to do this. I was strongly influenced to do this. You said none of that, which means you did it knowingly.
So one thing that you all would find interesting is after his first day of testimony, Detective Ron Sotos. Now, I've known Ron. I think he was in specialized unit of SCAD or something back when I was on SWAT. And so I'd see him, we'd be out in the same areas and stuff like that. I like the guy. I used to see him in the weight room and all that. He was a power lifter and all. And so that evening of his first day on the stand, I didn't get to say hi to him or anything like that because he came in from behind me. I was already sitting in the gallery there. And he calls me. And I didn't know that I still had his phone number in my phone. Otherwise, I would have answered it. And I saw his name and I was like, oh shit, that was my reaction. So I let it go to voicemail. And then we're on a common thread with the text thread with the attorneys. And I said, hey, Soto just called me. I probably shouldn't talk to him, right? And one of the attorneys says, yeah, probably not, but I'm open to opinions. And Nico, who was the lead, they were the lead law firm on everything, says, yeah, don't talk to him. But I wanted to talk to him as a friend.
Well, he must have wanted to talk to you too if he called you.
Yeah, yeah. But as a friend, I really wanted to tell him, and I didn't want to make it long, but I wanted to say, hey, dude, and I don't want to sound morbid in this, but it was the best analogy I can come up with. It's like these poor people that were on the Twin Towers that were up there caught because, the fire's in the middle and they're up top, the fire's coming up, there's smoke billowing out, they're at the windows, and they have one of two choices. Either die, burn to death in the fire, or jump to the death. And I wanted to tell Ron Soto, you're about in that same pickle, not with death, but with your character and your reputation. It would be best, for one, to tell the truth. Don't say that this was all you, because we all know it wasn't, that you were directed to do this, and out it. And I think a lot of you officers, the ones that are listening, some of you new ones that are listening, would have appreciated that, to know that the department directed this.
Yeah, he missed that window.
Yeah, you
can't go back now and says, well, yeah, I lied, but I shouldn't have done it.
But he also missed the window, because now, even if he wants to say that, that he's already expressed that he also believed the same shit, right? When he was testifying, he's going along with Luna and what Harris wanted him to say.
Like he believed that those three men killed that woman.
Right.
And
obviously you saw it was that night. Because when he said, I had concerns, and my smart ass response to that is like, dude, you're walking into an investigation. Everything should be a concern. I mean, that's the way you're supposed to keep it. But even Lisa herself says, yeah, you walk in there, but you can't go in there you leave your biases at the door.
Well, Lisa also said that the reason, they were talking a lot about the statements, and then Pratt, right? She says, well, I just took that statement. And, I covered it a little bit last time. I said, yeah, yes and no. Yes, they tell you to take a statement, but, you have to articulate a little better, and you have to ask questions. And then Lisa and Butch both said the same thing. They didn't ask the pertinent questions of the offense to at least try to ascertain if justification under Chapter 9 was made. And
what were you feeling?
Well, Butch had also pointed out that you're forgetting they had just been involved in a traumatic incident. They just fired their weapons and a woman died. And it's like you've been in a shooting. Butch was in a shooting. Like a lot of times, even if you get in an accident, and you're trying to, talk about what happened, which is a much lesser degree of urgency, of course.
Still stressful.
You're processing. That's why in a statement, you just don't give someone a pen. I took statements, it's different now, but I would ask them questions and they would give me answers. And I'd say, okay, let me ask you something about that. And it wouldn't be just for your officers, it would be for complainants. Because I need them to answer the questions that they may not immediately.
But you should know that of what you need from them as an investigator. So therefore you should know your law pertaining to this alleged situation. You know what I'm saying? So you kind of direct them. It's not hiding anything or anything like that. These guys, especially when you got guys on that 4 years for Salinas that had on at the time. What's his name? Alejandro. And I just heard or learned this. This was his third shooting for such a young officer that had been obviously justified. What we see now, the other two were. So he's been involved in some of them, and he he even recognized that this was these guys' first shooting. For him. Not that he felt like, no big deal.
Alfred Flores said that, and I didn't see all of it, but they gave an interview to, I think it was Yami, and it was like, I'd never been an officer involved shooting. We were talking off camera. I served 33 years on a lot of, high octane units. I was never involved in officer involved shooting. I was at the scene of a lot of them.
Yeah.
I've had people under me. I just had it.
Sometimes that happens.
And there were times when, I probably I was very close to being involved.
Sure.
In one. But, to me, I look at it, I'm glad I wasn't. But those that were, they just were. And there are some people, you can name them, like 4 or 5 come to mind, that were in 2, 3, or 4 shootings over their course of their career. And then someone like me was never involved in a shooting.
Oh.
So that's just happens in the job sometimes. But
it is, and it's
but
not.
The dramatic part of it is important.
It's just the way certain officers have and that they are. For me, being on SWAT for 17 years, being in rope for 13, I was only involved in 3. I say only, and that is for not lack of putting myself in those situations. That it's just the way it happened, which tells you, some of these officers, you weren't looking to get into it, not trying to goad a shooting, and it's just you just take it as it goes.
They didn't go.
No, which was which they kind of alluded to in this trial, as if these guys all had this huddle and this meeting going, hey, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bring her together. We want to get her, make sure she picks up that hammer, make sure she runs at the door, and therefore we can all shoot her. You ready? Ready, break. That's not how this happened. They had no types of any kind of meetings whatsoever or intentions in their own minds.
Officers carry that with them. It's so aggravating when people make it seem like it's just flip a switch and it's off. It's a lot to take a life. People are police officers. I don't care. We got some people comment on our YouTube page and says, whatever, all you cops take care of each other. You're all a bunch of this and cowards and this, that, and the other. And like, whatever, man. I don't have time for you. There was also one that was on there, a statement. I'm only mentioning it too because as well, I was going to give you guys the benefit of the doubt and listen, but as soon as you brought up, ICE, I was out, and I'm like, well, then this is not the channel for you because it was on that little comment thing.
Oh.
And I was like, we're always going to stand up and champion the men and women of law enforcement, regardless of what that law enforcement agency is when they're right. And if that's not for you, then tune off. See you later.
Yeah, but I tell you, one of the hardest parts is social media, reading the comments on things. That's especially if you're involved in some sort of ordeal that makes the news. One of the best pieces of advice to give to any officer is don't go read the news article, number one, and definitely don't go read the comments.
Yeah, that won't work.
That will not help your mental state at the time.
But I had a question, man, and I really wanted your take. And I'm not making any allegations, okay? But I'm just raising a question. You know, just like Daryl Harris and David Noonan did, right? You posed questions that I think that you knew probably weren't accurate. So I'm going to pose a question to you. So if Daryl Harris was at the meetings, right, with Russ Van Geffen, the captain, and they came up, and at that point, maybe even with the chief and the rest of the people I talked about earlier, right, the 2 assistant chiefs and a couple of XOs up there, and if they were there, and Daryl Harris knew that decision to arrest was already made, and he is now a prosecutor in a trial in which the lead detective says under oath on the stand that he's the sole person that made the decision to arrest. So I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to get back to it. Under the law, subornation of perjury is the crime of persuading or permitting a person to commit perjury, which is the swearing of a false oath to tell the truth in a legal proceeding, whether spoken or written. And so I'm like, okay.
That's a good point.
Did you have an obligation to do what you said? We're going to need to excuse the jury for a minute, sir. You know, I'm going to see you in chambers. You can bring the defense in.
I was part of that.
Because I know that conversation was there, and it's different than what's being said here.
In the course of your reviewing this incident and this investigation, did you come to find out of a meeting with Captain Van Geffen?
Yes, Captain Van Geffen wrote a report about that meeting.
Did you review that report?
It was only a couple of lines, yes.
Did you come to find out whether Captain Van Geffen met with certain people about this incident?
Yes.
Who did Captain Van Geffen meet with?
His report stated that he met with Mr. Harris.
Do you know when that happened?
The day of the shooting, later in the afternoon.
So the day of the shooting later in the afternoon, within that 16 hours, right?
Yes, sir.
Captain Van Geffen met with Mr. Daryl Harris sitting at the government's table here.
That's what his report reflected, yes.
Did the report reflect what they talked about?
The report said they discussed the case and the decision was made to arrest.
Okay, I want to talk about that. So what you're telling this jury, based off Captain Van Geffen's report, that Captain Van Geffen met with this gentleman to my left, Daryl Harris, and the discussion in that meeting was made to make the arrest.
That's what the report reflected.
So is it fair to say that Mr. Harris was involved in that decision to make this arrest?
I can't reach that conclusion, but it conflicts with Detective Soto saying he made the decision to arrest.
It just makes you think, right?
He wanted to be so.
You want to be in the meetings. You think this is real life law and order where you know what? I was telling someone the other day, there was only one time in my whole career, and I was on a lot of SO units. I was in dope, gangs, intelligence. Only one time did we ever regularly consult with an ADA. And that's when I commanded the Violent Crime Task Force, where we had DPS, the county, and us all doing this in a uniform in a uniform capacity, and then with all of the plainclothes elements supporting. And we had a U.S. attorney and a district attorney assigned to us. That was the only time. But not once did I ever ask them, are you okay with me making this arrest? Not once.
Yeah.
We did it. And then we said, hey, we got these cases coming up. We just want to kind of make you aware because it's going to be 15, 16 defendants. We got to get you in.
Don't forget that. If we can get Judge Rangel on, that would be a question to ask him.
Yeah, that should have already been asked of him.
Sure.
You know,
but and I wanted to say, Harris was thinking of himself as following the process of being so ethical that he has to bring up to the judge that, hey, I spoke with the juror because they complimented me on my tie. And, when I heard that, I was like, who gives a shit? Because we saw jurors at the time that would give us casual greetings, and that is okay. Yeah. We would ride in the elevator with them.
Because it's the mere presence of impropriety. So I thought it was a little much, but if you wanted to grandstand, somebody liked your tie. The tie wasn't all that.
It was one of these, pardon my, if you know what that means.
Just shaking the dice in Vegas, shoot some craps.
Right, but that's what he did. Because I did find it it was completely odd. And of course, Judge jokes with it. Well, you shouldn't always wear such a nice tie, with that.
I think he was being a little
He was
sarcastic.
he was. But that is a good point. that if he's going to let Soto say something that he knows he was part of the process, then Soto's not telling the truth.
So it goes back, to what Lisa originally said. Was that like a purposeful omission? It's like you had a duty. You had a duty to say, I was in some meetings that day, and
it wasn't just
accurate.
that purposeful omissions. They didn't bring on the second officer on scene, Ramos. They didn't bring on Maria Salinas.
They didn't bring on Ramos because Ramos made an ass of himself, and it didn't look good.
Well, but I tell you, we've seen guys like that. They were, and I get what the point they were trying to make. But the main thing was when he pulled his taser, just as she had just run into to her apartment, and they were kicking the door a little bit, and he pulled his taser and he said, "You left your dog out here. I'm going to taser." And he pulls the cartridge and he spark tests, and God rest her soul. It was kind of funny. She goes, "That's dog abuse," and it was a ruse. What if it would have worked? What if a crazy woman like her would have opened the door and come out and said, "No, what are you doing to my dog?" And then they grabbed her. End of situation. You know what I mean? I don't disagree with those things. There were times when I was on rope and SWAT, or even as patrolmen, we're trying to get somebody out of a house. They just ran into there, and we had a legal reason to get in there, but we didn't maybe have the tools like a RAM at the time to get in the way that we would like to or whatever. And there were times I'd pull screens off, I'd knock things over from there. So it's like, hey, SWAT's on the way. We're gonna get in, and it worked. It worked probably 3/4 of the time where they're like, these guys are coming in. 100%. But they were saying that Ramos was being an ass on that. Now it was annoying. And he was banging on the door and stuff like that. Yes. And what people might consider professional, there's certain things about professionalism that people just don't like or you have to deviate from, and then they're going to consider you like you weren't that as professional. But so they didn't bring those guys on, and like Nico even mentioned it, and there was one point, and Nico, so you had the prosecutors sitting here on their table, and then you had Nico's and his and Goss were sitting here, and then at different times they would trade places depending on who was actually doing the question at the time. But Nico was sat here most of the time, and Nico was within arm's length of touching and he would touch and I know he was doing it on purpose. He would touch their desk at a time. And he would turn around and he says, "Well, they didn't even bring on Marie Salinas," or one of the other one was Dallin Young, and then the one that they eventually did bring on,
Thompson.
Yeah, Thompson. And Nico looks, he goes, "You gonna bring in Thompson?" And they just sat there like friggin' mannequins. They didn't say a word, and he goes, "Okay, we will," and it just went on, and it was such.
There was definitely some psychological.
I had to hold my laughter a lot of times in this jury. Speaking of Soto, and talk about laughter, was when he said, and we'll post this. You'll see this right now, where Soto said, "One thing we did know was that she was never going to let go of that hammer."
Yeah.
Is that woman was capable of coming out of that window and hitting somebody standing exactly where Sergeant Flores was?
Yes.
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 And if she throws that hammer and hits him in the face, that's a risk of serious bodily injury or death, right?
Yes, you can make you can say that about a lot of different objects. But the one thing we do know is she never was going to ever let go of that hammer. She kept that hammer.
Okay, so here, and I want to go with that. You think you know that, and I think that's the issue, is that you think that you know that she was never going to let go of that hammer. The problem is she was never going to let go of that hammer until she did let go of that hammer, and if she did let go of that hammer, an officer standing in Officer Salinas' spot right there is at risk from that hammer. You would agree with that?
I didn't know this was funny, but the whole time she's telling you what she's going to do. That hammer is all she has to protect her home. That's it. She never once showed that she was going to throw that hammer at anybody.
Objection, non-responsive. Well, I'll tell you.
I'm just basing it on what I see on body cam.
I'll tell you this.
Her actions.
I get it. I get what you see on body cam, and forget about what all of these officers have actually saw at the scene and at the time. But here's what I'm saying. Nobody thought it was funny. Everybody thought it was ridiculous.
And
it started laughing. Or
Well,
not laughing.
there,
as it
there was
funny,
there was
it
laughter,
yeah.
and I was in the stands, and I was listening.
It
I
was
heard
disbelief.
and I went like,
It was disbelief.
"What?" Yes, it was disbelief, and it happened in unison at the same time. And then you hear some laughter, and he says to the jury, he goes, "I didn't know this was funny," and he goes on. I forget exactly what he said. And Jason Goss says, "It's not that it was funny.
Yeah.
They just found it so ridiculous
Yeah.
that you would say that, And again, that was part of that. Like, this dude believes this shit.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know
that's
how.
the inexperience. Two things. There's, and I don't want to talk about him much longer, but two things. One is like the unsolicited statement when he went up there. Well, I had concerns, but I didn't have predetermined. Nobody asked you a question. Just get up on the stand.
Right.
And the other thing is like, don't put yourself in a position that you can't back up. She was never going to let go of that hammer. You have no idea what she was going to do. And the officers, right, Ramos and those two, that's a pretty good example of what our point earlier. Those guys never thought that call was going to end up like this.
No.
Or they never would have acted like that.
No.
It was just another call. There was a call in the medical center about 4 years ago, real quick, just to let you know how calls can happen. The guy gets up there, it's on daylight, it's in a hotel, one of those extended stays. Guy and a girl, man and woman, fighting over a pillow. Guy gets up there, canceled cover, had made calls there before. I think you talked about it once before. And as he's talking to him, the guy reaches in his pocket, takes out a fixed blade, a knife, folding knife, opens it up, and stabs the officer in the throat. And the officers, I never saw it coming. So, it's for all those people that are out there saying, they should have never handled it like that. Close your eyes and think about being in that situation. And so, but I did want to talk about Butch, because I think these statements are really important, that what the seasoned, true experienced investigators will say that change the outcome of the trial, in my opinion, or at least, rapidly change the verdict, the return of the verdict. He said, Butch Majeka, right? Thomas Majeka, 727 years of law enforcement or something like that. Just kidding. But,
A lot.
Yeah. 30, I think he's at 47.
Yeah.
That's what he said. Statement taking after a traumatic event. That's why you need to ask pertinent questions so the statement recorded are accurately recorded. Excuse me. Then he says the purpose of the investigation is to determine the truth. We've kind of banged that thing a few times here. Then he says that was not during this investigation in any way, shape, or form. And this is the part that I think he said that's important. Soto misunderstood his purpose in this investigation, and that is why he failed. He literally said failed. And then there's another part where he says this part. When Soto said he made the decision to arrest while on the stand, that is absolutely untrue. So you saw Lisa was getting there with, well, it's not quite lying, it's deceptive, It's purposely deceptive. And then you had Butch finally said, no, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
He lied, he freaking lied, and that's the end of it. Yeah. And so, so it goes back, are you Brady'd? You may not be formally Brady, but you're informally Brady.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, in homicide, you're not going to serve much of a purpose. If they told you weren't going to be moved, you will be at some point, because you can't work on anything.
Well, and again, it for one, it pains me that he was in that situation, number one, and obviously it wasn't just him alone. He is the low man on the totem pole. So, he would be the one to fry if there was going to be anyone to fry. And I think for him, his best bet, I'm pretty sure he's UEDI certified still, is to just transfer out, go back into the lineup of UEDI. They'll probably send you to East Dog Watch with Tuesday, Wednesdays off, and just disappear into, as Mike Tyson would say, go to Bolivia, but disappear into oblivion. Just let time take its course.
But Willie, that's not even a viable situation for him, because if you do go back to some place, you're going to be working around people that just aren't going to trust you.
Well,
They're just not going to treat you.
there still may be a bunch of young guys over there that he can just, do whatever. I'm just saying, it's either that or quit. For him.
Tell him to quit. But what I can tell him is that maybe you were thrust into the lead role, because I could tell you a story. I was thrust into one of these roles and I did the wrong thing. Simply in terms of this, I told the sergeant, I'll just tell you real quick, it was an officer involved case. I was in major crimes, working sex crimes, and Rosie Vasquez comes in and gives me a case on a West Patrol guy. The lady says, hey, she was violating her parole. The parole officer was going to arrest her. He says, the reason I didn't come in, I was sexually assaulted by an officer. Oh. I told Rosie, I said, hey, I don't want this case. She says, you're going to do it. You have the skills to do it. That's the end of it. You're going to do it. So I wound up, I did some interviews and didn't work as hard as I should have. Got the parole officer telling me she's full of it. She's chronically violated. 3 months later, Greg Brooks, Greg, we talked about him before, gets case on the same officer. Comes to me and says, hey, didn't you have this guy before? Similar circumstances. I walk into my captain's office, Jeff Page, and I said, Captain, I effed up. I'm reopening this case. We want to arrest him, both of those charges. So my point is, you can make up for it, but at the end of the day, you got to learn from it. And I think Soto, while you might have been propelled into the position of handling this case, you had lots of opportunities to do the right thing. You had lots of opportunities to say, hey, I didn't agree with this. Or even if you did agree with this, you should have been more truthful and saying, I was told to walk these warrants, rather than conduct a full investigation, view all the evidence, send it over across the street, let it go before a grand jury, and let's see what they say. But you didn't do that.
But we as police officers, I know I have and you have, you learn to read people. And police officers are no different than anybody you're talking to, any suspect whatsoever. Same mannerisms if they're being untruthful or being reluctant on things. And one thing I did not see from him was reluctance to answer certain questions. Because like if you're going to ask me something, I was kind of made that it would be, I would wear it like a friggin' shirt, that you can see that I really don't want to say this, but I'm saying it. You know what I mean? I didn't see him paying through any of those. I think at one point Nico asked him something like, "Have you spoken to the state here since that last day?" No, I haven't. Like, how could you not?
Yeah.
How could you not have some sort of collaboration with them? Because this was all planned. You can't just say, this is what we want to do, have at it. Because they're going to say the wrong thing.
Even if that were remotely possible, which, just the DAs, man, they're busy. They got a lot of cases and, we've already met on a pretrial, whatever. But even if that was remotely possible, you had an obligation to review everything. This was a big trial. 3 of your colleagues, 3 sworn officers were going to be charged with murder. You were the lead. You should have reviewed everything. The other officers should have taken time. We kind of covered that. Like, it's a big deal. Review the policies so that you don't get hit with questions that make you look like you're not in a good enough position to hold the position that you have. And I tell you what, that one case I just outlined told me, and it was said to me, and it just hit more home at the time. Hey, brother, everybody that's a police officer doesn't deserve to be a police officer.
Yeah.
It's something you have to continuously earn. And that stuck with me, and I always remember Rosie Vasquez for that. I remember you anyway, Rosie, because, we're friends. But, man, she taught me a big lesson that day. And I always appreciated that, and it's important. Mark Duke, right? I wanted to just say one thing that he brought up here, because he did a really good job too. Again, said he would never testify for the defense, saw this thing, had to do it. He says, I was very surprised when Jason gave him the case and why he decided to testify. He says, I was very surprised of what I saw in the decisions that were made, the huge injustices that were done in working this case. And then he says, it's important to say this. He says, you have to collect the dots before you can connect the dots. And he says, in my professional opinion as an expert, was this investigation executed well? And then he says, no, sir, not at all. And so you have a lot of experts now all saying very similar things about what happened here. So all the people, and the reason I say this, you start looking at the KSEC comments and all this, and there's always everybody has something to say, right? And we'll get to the end of the trial here shortly. And there's always comments, no, the chief's done a good job. The chief's a good man. The chief.
I saw that time and time again on the news.
You didn't watch the trial, because if you'd have watched the trial, you would have seen that this should have never happened. And you're also, kind of privy to what the chief does very well, is create the illusion that he's all of the things you think he is, but he's not. And the people of the San Antonio Police Department has no confidence in him as a leader. And hopefully there'll be a second vote of no confidence. And once again, everyone will see that the men and women at the operational level of the police department have no confidence in him as a leader. And
well, one thing people need to understand, and they won't, I know they won't, especially people that say something that friggin' stupid. They just like seeing the chief. And because he stands out there, in front of the camera on any situation and, give the details. They're usually wrong, but, like as if he's there and concerned with everything that, that goes on in the police department. And I have said it several times before. We are not bashing this chief because he has screwed us over. Dave and I retired gracefully, in good standing, no doubt. The chief treated me fairly when I was there, and I'm sure he treated Dave fairly. And Dave was in command staff, so I don't know. But
I had it's funny. I'll tell you real quick, man. I was a captain from 2011 to 2023. I was an interim deputy chief in 2020 for 6 or 7 months. I was asked to do it again. I declined. I was given a lot of big projects, and I did pretty well in those projects. I didn't have really a bad relationship with him at all. In fact, there was one time where, we kind of stepped in it, and I got an audience with him, and it took a while. My deputy chief, Jeff Humphreys, at the time, was kind of working with me on this one, and we got him to see it a different way. The reason I did is because I got through the buffer bullshit. I got through the Bobby Blatton, and I got through the Karen Fall, and I got through those people to finally get to him. But he's solely responsible for his decisions, and I don't like what he's doing to the men and women. And honestly, in this case and so many others, I don't see an ounce of respect. I don't see an ounce of integrity or compassion or fairness in any of it. No. And that's something you have hanging on your wall. So,
and he's, and I think you alluded to it here a little while ago. We have no longer, and I feel like I can comfortably say this, the San Antonio Police Department has lost its way of what we are actually supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be fair and impartial and bring justice and protect people and
those
things
are all
like
good
that.
Sound bites,
yeah.
Sure.
But what we've gotten into because of our city government, in San Antonio and Bexar County, we just have become a place to appease these people. This situation particularly, and I've said it in the last podcast about it, this was a political persecution because it looked like a black eye on the police department. And so the chief not just didn't try to say, well, it wasn't a black eye, he actually put more makeup on it to show it was a black eye, to see how bad it was. He just, he saw how bad it looked. He didn't even want to take the time to say, hey, wait a minute. The process is this. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty, even though most policemen don't believe that. I still don't believe that. And there is a process. We put them on administrative duty. We do this investigation up to these points. And if we decide, obviously we work together with the DA's office. And then if we determine that there was a crime, well, then that's how it goes forward. Now, mind you, even with this political point of interest that we're trying to make, it still could have gone this way. But I think it worked out in these guys' favor even more so that they panicked and they knee-jerked these arrests. That's when it caught everybody's attention. And that really puts the nail in the coffin that this was a political persecution, no doubt. Because there was, what did they gain by arresting them so soon? And it was even brought up in the trial. These guys aren't like career criminals that are, flight risk. We got to get them off the street. It was to make a point. That was it. They can care less. It was to parade them in front of the media, in front of the people, and the chief to say, I'm holding them accountable. They screwed up because I'm this friggin' top dog. I know everything, when he fucking doesn't. And as we know now, who's got one of the biggest slaps in the face is this chief of police, that they were wrong. They were wrong right out that what they thought initially, what they alleged these officers to do.
And it's not his first time being wrong. We did a podcast last year in around December, and we broke down all the money this guy has cost through lawsuits and back pay and arbitration and just bad decisions all the way around to the immigration thing in 2016 that Mike Kelly covered. All these millions of dollars that have been paid for out of taxpayer money to cover up this guy's.
But he's not held accountable for it.
He's not, and he probably won't be held accountable here either. There was a lot of, like we were talking about news cycles, right? There's been a lot of stuff that comes out. All the stations did it. There was some, Daddy Diaz finally came out and said some things about, maybe, I guess there were some people that wanted to do and vote of no confidence, and Danny finally, and good for you, Danny. I'm happy to see it. Maybe a little too little too late, but at the end of the day, it's better than nothing. and you're out there talking about this, but it's been a week already, and you'll see this stuff die down, and these guys bank on it. They know it. If you don't keep it in the news and the pressure's not high, it will go away and you will survive. But I thought the closings were a remarkable part of this thing. But before we do, I wanted to tell you, I think you talked to him, that expert Martinelli. Was that his name?
Yes.
Okay. Man, I thought he did a really good job breaking some things down. I think he broke down, and what I thought was interesting, he says, we're the only expert team that offers forensics, doctors, tactical people.
Martinelli and Associates
here, right? But he also said something about only 1.6 of all police encounters, 1.6 of all police encounters result in force. But they're always talking about force. They don't talk about the 98%, 98.4%. Or then it says you can't even put a percentage on the number of officer-involved shootings resulting in death when it comes to the overall number of police contacts. So you can't even put a percentage on it.
No, there was a Harvard expert that put everything in perspective.
But every incident is blown into some seismic event that creates this narrative that allows people to keep on saying the police are out of control, the police are not this.
Because there's an agenda since Obama to destroy law enforcement. And again, I'm going to blame it on Obama. Lots of people know that by now. This is when all this shit started. If you look at the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, their website, they explicitly tell you their whole agenda is to destroy the police. And we are on that path. This was what this was about. Why are you wanting to destroy this very entity that stands between you and your safety and evil? You know, so there's an agenda for it. And again, who are they trying to please to get these guys convicted? Not on the law, but just, I think I told you this at some point during the trial, I felt like they were just, Harris was going to get out and go, look, I get it. I get the law. Let's not worry about that little thing called the law. It's just, 3 policemen shot a mentally ill woman. Like, we should just put them away for life just because of that. Because it looks bad.
I was telling Nick, I would love for this. I wanted the defense to say it so bad. I wanted to say, hey, and I'll just say that you can dub it if you want to, but from that My Cousin Vinny movie,
yeah.
right?
Everything that guy just said is bullshit. Thank you.
But that's what you want to say, because at the end, when there was closing, I mean, Harris just showed 3 videos of officers that weren't even the shooters.
Yeah.
And then I think Nico said that wasn't even a closing; it was just videos. And then I wanted to ask you, do you remember about 7 or 8 years ago, there was this big case that came up, and it was a judge that got arrested and was saying something about, the judge was a prosecutor and didn't disclose information, and then it became a big case law. It was the Michael Morton case. Mm-hmm. You remember that?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask, is does Morton apply here too?
They brought it up.
Did the state have an obligation to say, wait a minute,
Yes.
So you have like 3 very serious questions about judicial misconduct, really, if you really want to bring it up, right? And again, I'm not making any allegations. I'm posing questions. Were you suborning?
No, the Attorney General of Texas should be looking at this, and they have across the country they have we have this rogue prosecutor law. And I one thing I hate is I think because Joe says, well, I'm not running again. Well, we're just going to let him ride off into the sunset. No, fuck this guy. He has done too much damage, and again, we know, there's all the cliff notes that you need. Soros financed his campaign. He was in collusion with the Wren Collective on the Brennan case. I believe he's still in collusion with them because he stopped talking about it. No one's asked for an Open Records Act on this stuff. None of that came out on this one. I would think that Nico and they would have found it. But I think they found another backdoor way to talk to these people. This is right up their alley to do this stuff.
And it's going to be so important. The next time, of course, we're going to have limited turnout from the voters, right? Again, like I was saying on that Heli podcast, I defend the voters. But inaction is no longer an option. You got to get out there. The people that are running for DA are going to have a big impact on how these cases are prosecuted in the future. But I wanted to get to the closing because we always go far. especially too far on time sometimes. And it takes a lot. We're asking a lot of people to spend an hour and a half or whatever listening to you and I. But I thought the two people, everyone did a good job in the closing, but I thought that Del Prado and Nico's closing were like off the hook. I mean, they were like, man, damn, you know?
Yeah, that's
freaking good, right?
It could have been scripted for a movie any better, right?
And you saw it natural, right on point. Like the timing was on, the eye contact was in kind, the affliction was on time. Del Prado said, Detective Soto is investigating should be the 3 most dangerous words in the English language. The other thing he said is, Nico got up there and says, telling the jury, right, again, affliction on point, just the way Nico talks, a lot of energy, right, very, very strong, very confident. You know, looking right at the jury, he says, don't Soto our San Antonio. Right.
Yeah.
And I showed it to you. I almost made a shirt. The only reason I didn't is because I don't want to be the guy that's kicking somebody when they're down. And I know that, like, you know, no, you shouldn't do this. But the other point of it, the other part of it, he says, don't let Detective Soto be our standard.
That too.
And I'm just, man, these are points that I'm not hearing from the police department, because then when they went to go talk to homicide, they didn't say any of these
They're
things.
letting them be their standard.
And yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying you got to say don't Soto or San Antonio if you're working for the police department, but you got to say, hey, the standards were met. This isn't good enough. You didn't do a good job. And you know what a real leader would say? And it starts with me, because I didn't do a good job. So we're going to do it together, right? But that didn't happen.
So when he said that, Don Soto or San Antonio, you know, there were several people watching live. You know, I'm sitting there in the stands there, and I get a text from a friend of mine. He's not a cop, but you know, with phones nowadays, computers, boom, 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 you can just put things up like that. And this dude he sends me a T-shirt, and it says that Don Soto, and it's the skyline of San Antonio. It says Don Soto, my San Antonio.
I told you, my daughter made one up.
Yeah.
You can just make it up.
And I was like, and I almost started laughing out loud in the
So
jury.
that's a credit, right? Because this is a confession. I almost thought about getting it and wearing it, you know. And I said, okay, look, man, you know, are we gimmicks now? Like, no, that's not.
I just, you know, I mean, the guy was beat up, you know, and rightfully so. But I'm not going to be part of that, you know, to anymore. Again, because I'm not putting all the blame on him. He is definitely a culprit in this, but it's the city that did the chief's office that did it to him. The administration and the higher ups of the homicide office, they did it to him, you know. And I don't know if there's going to be any fallback from them, because the shit has to roll up their heel.
Well, I see it a little different, because I gave him that benefit of the doubt, but I go back to what I said earlier. He was a Marine, right?
I don't know.
Soto? I thought so.
I don't know.
Maybe not. If you weren't, I apologize. But if you were, thank you for your service. But I'm looking at this, and I said, even if, because my point is, it's easy to get wrapped in that. You're meeting with the chief knows who you are, you're given a big case. This could be the one, you know, I'll get another unit, I'll get up, I'll fast track, whatever the case is, all that false hope about being in the circle, right? That circle of shit really is what it is. You don't want to be in that circle. That's a circle of shit. But, you know, he was under oath. And when you're under oath, you can say the truth anytime you want to, and he didn't. And I just can't forgive that.
Had he admitted that he was forced to do this, he'd also be a whistleblower. And so therefore he'd be protected by whatever whistleblowers are protected by to do that. You know, again, that's what I wanted to tell him at the time.
Invoke a whistleblower.
Sure, but you know, we talk about retaliation from the police department.
Yeah, well.
You know, and you know, there was an order that was put out by the judge about speaking to the defense, because the defense wanted to talk to certain officers, and they were like, I was told not to talk to anybody. Yeah. Well, the judge is like, you know, y'all need to talk to them, and it was an actual order the judge put out, and you will not be retaliated against. You know, Bobby Moreno showed it to me. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah, has that ever stopped them? Because they never say they're
no, because
it's always in the best interest of the department.
Right, the department will let it kind of blow by. Next thing you know, you're gone. Yeah. You know, well, we just thought transfer. It was, yeah,
you know, it's time to move.
We're the best, you know, or they make your life hard and you end up leaving anyway. But anyway, we've gone kind of long on this.
And one more for Del Prado. Sorry, I just got to say it because these guys are freaking awesome, and they put a lot of work in the closing. It just blew me away. And this is what Mario Del Prado said in his closing. If Soto could have gotten away with lying to you, he would have. And, you know, these are Mario Del Prado's words, not mine, but they're powerful words. And I just needed to close on that. I just really said, man, these lawyers, all of them did a great job. These two had closings that really impacted me, and I guarantee they impacted the 12 people on that jury. And I hope that there's nobody else in this police department in San Antonio that decides to fall for that false narrative or hope that you should do something you shouldn't just because it's coming from them. You know, you shouldn't. You should do the right thing.
Now, mind you, like I mentioned about the chief, we don't have a bone to pick with this guy. We are not
a pretty big bone to pick with him at this point.
Well, at this point, you know, we didn't start out that way, and I think I said it in another podcast. I didn't, and now I do because of what he's been doing. You know, and again, it's not on us particularly, and I say that because it's not like we're being vindictive about anything that happened to us. Dave and I just feel compelled, again, by virtue of what we used to do as police officers, sworn law enforcement, to uphold the truth, you know, and the justice of what we believe is right. You know, I always want to know the truth, whether I like it or not. I don't want to be that guy to try to live a lie. It'll catch up with you eventually and all. But we want to bring these things to light, and we call things as they are. If the chief sounds like a fucking idiot, it's because this trial just showed you he's a fucking idiot. He doesn't know his job. He needs to go. I don't know what his replacement is going to look like from this city manager
It'll look at first. It will look like change, and then it will be worse. But you know something? That's better than allowing this to perpetuate itself. Because when I said, does the San Antonio Police Department have standards anymore? The city of San Antonio should have some standards too. You should expect more for your chief of police. Well, now, if we wind up getting somebody that far left or anti-police, then we'll deal with that when that happens. But it's a perfect time for us to say thank you, because in the back they're doing the post verdict press conference, and you know, it was a very good day. But it's been a week since then, and it's already quieting down. Don't let it quiet down, Danny. Don't let it quiet down.
And that's one thing we haven't even gotten to is the association president, and we will get to it here eventually. We already have talked about it, but this guy was complicit in and of itself. Now he's playing cleanup right now. Okay, now that we're talking about this vote of no confidence that the members have been wanting to do now with the chief, which is what looks good and actually supports what we're talking about with this chief. But Danny's not leading the charge. He's just the association president. He didn't call for it, but he's not saying no because it makes him look good.
We didn't let him look good. Now's the time. It doesn't matter how you got there, you're there. Do not let this die down. Hold the vote of no confidence. Get out there in the media, talk. And when you talk to the media, tell me, I want to do it live. Because you said something, right? Hey, you know what? I said this, they edited. Just tell them, say, hey, I want to do it live.
Yeah. Have a press conference yourself. Yeah. And then they can't edit your content there. But anyway, I think we talked enough about this. Please stay tuned. I know it went a little bit long. Obviously, we have a lot to talk about with this. We're going to have these other guests on. We're going to have these attorneys that the defense attorneys that you got to see. I mean, these guys are like celebrities now, at least in our realm. And then the experts, just like Dave and I talked about, of how well they did and how much they made this case and compelling. At some point, and it may or may not come up, I'd like to speak with Ron Martinelli. You know, the guy's a fascinating man.
I'd love to do a podcast.
Yeah. They're the ones that brought out. He brought his first name is Angelos. Really good guy, but he's the guy that came out with the photogrammetry.
Oh, that was amazing. We didn't get to that.
And Angelos, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your last name, and I don't want to butcher it, but awesome job by y'all. But I think you know we've talked enough about this, at least you and I so far.
Thank you for
and please stay tuned. Thank you to Public Alliance for doing their great work. Thank you so much for your feedback and all. And just keep watching. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.